Hello, hello. Welcome to our webinar, Social Butterflies, Pollinator Garden Tips. While we would really love to be in person with you talking about all things butterflies, some of you may know that in the past we actually held quite a large event every year. It was 2 years running, and the third and fourth year have been canceled due to COVID. So we decided to go virtual and do a pollinator webinar today. I'm really excited about it. And I'm really glad that we have an opportunity to connect. While it may not be as good as being together in person, I think it's still wonderful that we can come together and learn more about our pollinators and also interact with each other. My name is Ashley Metzger. I'm with Desert Water Agency in the Outreach and Conservation Department. I also have Sochi Pena and Vicky Pettick here. They are part of the team as well. Sochi will be working on facilitating the webinar, and Vicky will be working on chat, Q&A, and monitoring. So if you have any questions, please pop them into the Q&A. You'll see a Q&A icon. Generally, it's down at the bottom of your screen. And then if you need technical support, if you could place that in the chat, we'll try and get you help as well. Just so that you all know, you are in listen only mode. So if you need to grab a cup of coffee or have a quick phone conversation, no worries, you're muted, no one can hear or see you. We are recording, and this is live on Facebook. So hello, Facebook folks. We're going to go ahead and open it up to everyone here. We have a short poll, just a couple questions to get the group warmed up and give our late attendees a couple minutes to arrive too. So the questions here: have you attended a DWA workshop in the past? What best describes you? We're trying to get a feel for our audience here so that our panelists can tailor their presentations accordingly. So just two quick questions. Those of you on Facebook, unfortunately, cannot participate, but I'll make sure to read you the results. So we're going to give you about 1 minute to fill out the poll. If you're new to Zoom, it might be a little bit tricky to find it. And if you're not able to find it or fill it out, no worries. You can also put it in the chat if you want to add anything to the poll. All right, let's go ahead and share those poll results. Okay. Wow, this is great. We have a good split of people. One person who's been with us before in person, and this is their first time virtually. Thank you for joining. A good amount of people who have been to our online workshops in the past. Wonderful, welcome back. I hope this one's as great as the one you attended last. And then for some folks, about a third of you, it's your first. Very good, thank you. I'm glad you heard about this and decided to attend today. And then in terms of our audience here, it looks like about 2/3 of people are residents with their own yard. So that's wonderful. There's folks from HOAs as well, a wonderful opportunity for people to learn about pollinator gardens and what they can do in their yards. Alrighty, we will introduce our first speaker. Micheline Gallagher is the Director of Education and Environmental Programming at the Annenberg Foundation Trust at Sunnylands. She oversees research programs including Monarch Butterfly tagging and olive harvest. She's done a bunch of really cool projects. And I am excited that I have an opportunity to get to know her today and hope to get to know her a little better in the future. And if you have not been to Sunnylands, please go. It is also home to a lovely Desert X exhibit. So with that, Micheline, I'll let you go ahead and get started.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen here. And you should be able to see that okay. So first of all, thank you for having me. I appreciate being able to have the opportunity to speak to those who are interested in pollinator spaces as we are at Sunnylands. And there's some new information that's come out recently. So I am going to kind of move fast through this to get through my 10 minutes before time's up. So if you have questions, I do have my contact information. Anyone is welcome to reach out with questions. So let's jump in. So we're talking in the desert about Western monarchs. And when we first started this project at Sunnylands, these are the maps that we were looking at. So you can see this space here on each one where the question mark is, that's in between the two pollinator routes and their migration. So this is the West Coast route along the California coast, and this would all be the Eastern routes. So spring migration, you have multiple generations going north. They live a few weeks, they're breeding, they're laying eggs on milkweed, and they're repopulating as they move north. What happens in the fall is that migration turns around and one generation does the entire migration. They're known as a super generation. They live 6 or more months. They're not breeding or laying eggs. They are just heavily feeding on nectar plants and on to get lipids and fats to get them through the winter. So they're moving very rapidly. When we started this, just to go back to this really quick, it was when there wasn't a lot known, we actually reached out to the public, and through a lot of citizen science, the monarchs have hugely benefited. Basically, all that was being asked was report what you see. Eggs, monarchs, chrysalis, everything. And those started to populate maps like the one in the bottom middle here, this Journey North map. Journey North is the site. And the last slide, I have all the groups that I'm talking about today, so you'll be able to see how to contact them. But here, we could see that people would call in with all of this. And then those were used to populate these more detailed maps. And we started to learn about this migration. We know that both groups are genetically similar. They're connected somehow. So they are crossbreeding somewhere. And we knew that this big gap area had not been really looked at. So over these several years, we've gotten a lot more information. There's still a lot we don't know, but we do know that the desert is a significant place where there is some crossing over and back and forth going, and we're still learning about that. So what's happened to the Western population? If you've been watching the news, it looks very dire. What happened is we had a huge rapid drop in the last season, down to under 2,000 from over 20,000 the year before. This isn't the first time we've seen something like this. We saw actually an even bigger drastic one between 95 and 2003. The interesting thing is that there was some modeling done by Ars Technica who were able to determine that the biggest impact on the monarchs was loss of habitat and Asclepias, which is milkweed, across the region, particularly in the Midwest. And they did a model that showed this exactly what we were seeing in the field, that between 95 and 2003, we lost a huge portion of Asclepias, 21%. And then during that same time, we saw a major decline in monarch butterflies. And they stayed down in these ranges and have not recovered, but they were staying up and down in here, which kept giving us hope. And then suddenly they did another deep dive. Now, so what do we do with this? So the main thing to remember is that if we only focus on the monarch as numbers, we miss a lot of other things that we need to be working on and we need to improve. So if you look at those maps that I showed you, that is a huge migration route for a species, and yet they're still declining, which is telling us that we really need to look at habitat. We really need to look at the spaces they're going through and figure out what's going on. We know that it is the depletion of Asclepias that is the #1 issue with them, but there's also parasite issues. There's also other environmental issues that are coming in to play here. So for us, it feels like this is a huge, huge issue and there's not much we can do. But these pollinator gardens are significant for a couple reasons. #1, we've discovered that in doing some studies on habitats, that small habitat parcels, multiple small habitat parcels, are hugely significant, especially for endangered species and especially for flighted species. When we have land mammals that we're trying to protect territory for, we have to build these corridors for their migration, which is hugely land intensive. We don't need to do that for flighted pollinators. We need to have spaces, multiple spaces along the way where they can land. That means that if multiple people create habitats in their backyard and front yard, they actually can have a huge effect on that. You get a neighborhood to do that, it's even bigger. You get a community to recognize that, it's even bigger. And so both Asclepias, the milkweed that we really focus on because that's what they lay their eggs on, are important. Half that migration, remember, going back south, is not breeding, and they need these, they need the nectar plants to collect the lipids, which are fats. It's like a bear going into hibernation. They need to get really fat by the time they get down to their overwintering spots. And then that needs to sustain them through the winter. And they do find that those that arrive skinnier do not do as well as those that have really stocked up on their way down. And a depletion of nectar plants is going to be a concern with that. So what's happened so far on a bigger scale? The IUCN in 1995 did identify the monarch migration as a threatened phenomenon. In fact, they added a new category to list them because the monarch at that time, the numbers weren't so low that they were considered threatened at that moment. But the migration, because of what was going on in the field, was identified as a threatened phenomenon. Move forward to last year, December 15th, we found out that the monarch butterfly was denied listing under the Endangered Species Act. The interesting part about it was that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, even though they met all the criteria for it, they acknowledged that there were other species, too many species that were currently at a higher priority than the monarch. And so they've been put on hold for listing behind these other species. Two things that have happened recently to be aware of. There's two on March 17th, two pieces of legislation were brought back to the floor. The Monarch Act, HR 5920, was brought to the House of Representatives, and that is to fund a conservation plan that was already designed in 2019. So it's already designed, it's ready to go, it needs funding. The other one is the Monarch and Pollinator Highway Act that went to the Senate, 2918. That one is to provide grants for these state departments of transportation and Native American tribes to carry out, taking over those areas that are not being built on, that are along highways and strips of land, and to start building habitat there as well. So these are two things to watch for. These are two things, if you're interested, to definitely be pushing. The other thing that you can do is training and getting involved. So there's two things that people want to do when they hear that a species is depleting. One of them is to plant as much as possible. Really focus on regional specific plants. If you live here part-time and you live somewhere else other times, figure out what the regional milkweed is for your area. The Xerces Society is your best option for seeing that. And I have their information on the next slide. What you want to do is make sure you have what's for your region, because instead of focusing on monarch, we need to focus on habitat. And there are other species that also need those plants. So you can triple your effect by sticking with regional plants. There are some problems with the Mediterranean, which is being pushed out in all kinds of garden centers. There's some problems with it for a couple of reasons. It is a high intense plant. If you're going to plant it and you're planting it for the monarchs and you want to keep the monarchs safe, there is so much you have to do to protect them from it. You have to continually cut it down because parasite loads build up on that plant. And as monarchs come through the following season, you could be creating a parasite hub that can interfere with them. The other thing that a lot of people contact us wanting to do is to farm monarchs. And I completely understand that that's the instinct that you have to do. We need to get the numbers out. But when you're doing that, you have to also recognize that's another, if you're going to do it right, it's another hugely intensive plan, because that is another spot where we do see high levels of OE parasites and the other diseases on these caterpillars. The problem is that there's multiple caterpillars being kept in containers as they're being raised. Unless you are constantly following like lab level protocols of disinfecting and keeping those spaces clean and keeping them separated, it's really time intensive to do it right and safe. If you don't, and you can't see those parasites and you release them, you are now putting somebody out there who can pass that on to the wild population. which is a concern. The other concern is if we don't address habitat, and this is why I like to focus more on habitat than the numbers. If we don't focus on habitat and we are raising farm-raised monarchs and then dumping them into the environment, and we haven't addressed that, you now add another stressor to the wild ones migrating through who are hungry and looking for food. And now we've just unleashed a whole bunch of other monarchs that are also out there in that space. So they're just things to think of if you're going to do this. If you want to really get involved and make a difference, the biggest thing you can do is dedicate a portion of your house, your backyard or front yard to these gardens. You don't have to turn everything over. I'm not recommending a $1 million re-landscape project, but give a corner of your yard, give a strip of land. If you have a land with a neighbor and you both put them in near each other, that's habitat. That's what they need. If you're interested in tagging or following that monitoring program, please contact us. We are more than happy to train you and to send you out into the world to do this work. The more, the better. The more we learn about the desert monarchs, the better for us to figure out what to do to help them. But we also determined that this is super significant because the first group of high school kids we brought in, the first question they had when we went to release butterflies that they had tagged was, does it bite? So these are 15-year-old kids who have grown up here in the desert and they didn't know if butterflies would bite. That's another issue that this brings up. The more people we have out working with pollinator programs and setting up these gardens and getting people experienced, these kids in 3 years are going to be voting on these open spaces and they need to know what the ecosystems that they're living within are like. So this is a really significant way to do that. My email is on here, so you can contact me if you have more questions or want to get involved, from propagating Asclepias on. Here's all the contacts. Thank you. I can see Ashley popping up, which means my time is up. I just barely made it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Micheline. This was so informative, and I think it's such a great opportunity. You know, we're all starting to think about getting back out there and being little social butterflies ourselves. So perhaps volunteering and getting involved in the tagging effort is something to look forward to. Again, if you have any questions for Micheline, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box or in the chat, and we're going to do all of the Q&A at the end. Our next speaker is Christine Hammond. And, you know, I first met Christine and she asked me a really important question. You know, what can we as a community and what can DWA do for the butterflies? And she's the one who actually inspired Desert Water Agency's Butterfly Garden, which you see behind me, a photo, and we'll talk about more a little bit later. She's the founder of Milkweed for Monarchs, and she's worked really hard to educate our community about monarch butterflies and the milkweed plant and how to make it thrive and sourcing. So Christine, we're so happy to have you here. If you want to turn your video on.
Do you see it?
I believe we do.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Christine Hammond, and I've been a resident in the desert now for over 20 years, over 22 years, and have thoroughly enjoyed my time in the desert. And one of the things that I've familiarized myself with is the plants of the desert. Sometimes I call myself a gardener, but I'm not really a gardener. I'm a fledgling gardener. But when I started learning about the plight of the monarch butterflies, I got very serious in gardening, and particularly in relation to pollinators and whatever we could do to help the monarchs survive. So what you're looking at is a desert milkweed, which is called Asclepias, which is the Latin name for milkweed, subulata, which is the desert plant. And that's a very, very important terminology for what we're doing here. So the monarch butterfly habitat is Asclepias milkweed. And in the desert, what they look for is the subulata. So this is it. So I want to just piggyback a little bit on what Mickalene was saying. Wow. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thanks. This is what the desert used to look like. Large open spaces, washes with lots of vegetation, and the milkweed grew all over the hillsides and down in the washes. Next slide, please. As we began to move into the desert, that land disappeared. And what we got were a lot of developments. We got the shopping centers, the dirt roads and trails were replaced with concrete and sidewalks. And so all of that habitat for the milkweed disappeared as well. I'm also concerned about the habitat for winter hibernation, which is in the along the coast of California and in central Mexico. And it's the butterflies east of the Rockies will frequently be found in Mexico. West of the mountains will frequently be found along the Oregon coast, or I'm sorry, the California coast. So I just wanted to show you what they look like. So next slide. This is a collection of the butterflies in the trees and this is the California coast. And this is what they look like when they're sleeping with their wings up. And if you, next slide, as the sun comes out, they open up their wings, and this is what you see. This is a picture that's several years old, and what we have right now going on is very different than what we used to have 20 years ago. Next slide. So this is what desert milkweed, Asclepias subulata, looks like in my backyard. This is a plant that's about 10 years old. It is, it's about 5 feet tall and 5 feet across, so they get very large. There are over 100 different kinds of milkweed in the North America. So that's why it's so specific. It's so important that we're specific about what we plant, as Mickalene was talking about. This is the plant for the desert. So this will grow here. It will grow in parts of Nevada and Arizona, Baja. You won't find this over on the California coast. This is a desert plant. So you'll see that it has green stems, and this is covered with the flower of the milkweed. And when those green stems are broken, there's a white milky liquid that comes out of them that is called, I don't remember the term, it's a steroid. And there are a bunch of different things in there that the caterpillar will consume as they're eating on the milkweed plant, which is the food source for the caterpillar. And it gives them a really bad taste. It's not a bad taste for the caterpillar, but for the predators of the caterpillar, it is very bad. And if a bird or another predator picks up one of the caterpillars, they will immediately spit it out because it tastes so bad, and they will let it, they don't forget that taste, and they let that caterpillar be for thereafter. So it's a protection for the plant, for the caterpillar. Likewise, if you tend to get that milky substance on your skin, it could create a rash on some people, but some people consider this a toxic plant for animals. And I will say that from the reading I have done, unless an animal eats the entire plant, it's not a problem. And I have had lots of animals at my house, and they pretty much ignore it unless there's something interesting going on. So I wouldn't I wouldn't be as concerned about that as some people would like you to be. The yes, thank you. So this is the flower of the milkweed. And what, if you look really closely, you'll also see a caterpillar there. This is not a monarch caterpillar. This is a queen caterpillar. And you can tell the difference based on the number, the rows of antenna that the caterpillar has. This one has 3 rows. And if you saw it a little closer, there might be a little bit of red at the base of those. But the caterpillar is enjoying a salad of milkweed and flowers. And if you look close at the fat flower, it's a very intricate flower, very much like some orchids, but it has a hood and horns to it. Very characteristic. And this is where the nectar, if you go down inside the flower, as the bees do, you'll find nectar. It's a very succulent flower. So you'll see this on the plant, the long stems. You'll also see seed pods on the plant. Next slide, please. So the seed pods look very much like a pod. So they're long, they could be as long as 6 inches. They get very fat. And at a point in time when they begin to dry and open, you can see the actual seeds themselves. So the monarch is attracted to this, but also the queen butterfly is attracted to this, which is how we get the queen caterpillars on the plant. So next slide, you can see the queen, what it looks like on the flower again. Next slide. And other insects are attracted by this plant as well. Here's the bee getting nectar. Next slide. This is a tarantula bug, which is an incredibly beautiful teal and copper bug. They love this plant. Next slide. And of course, the caterpillars. And this is a caterpillar that is beginning, it's gone through its caterpillar cycle, and it's beginning to form the typical J that you would see before they go into the chrysalis. This is a monarch. You can see that it only has 2 sets of antlers, but they're so similar in appearance at first glance that you really need to look closer to figure out what kind they are. Next slide. So other things to see, the chrysalis from that J forming caterpillar. Next slide. The monarch in the chrysalis as it's getting ready to hatch, to break out of that chrysalis. Next slide. And this is I actually was laying on the ground counting eggs and chrysalises at Sunnylands one day when I watched this monarch butterfly for about 30 minutes as it came out of its chrysalis. It was one of the most amazing things ever. So the birth of the monarch, and it comes out of its shell as an adult. It will hang around until it dries off its leaves and gets a bite to eat and takes off. Next slide. So where do you find the plants? That tends to be a challenge. I have never seen a desert milkweed at Lowe's or Home Depot, ever. And I don't know if that will ever change. They're not that easy to come by. You can find them sometimes at local nurseries. You want to ask for them by name. The farmer's market, this is the farmer's market in Palm Springs, and in conjunction with the Sustainability Commission, we have offered plants that have been grown by the Palm Springs High School Garden Club at this event. And so people have taken well over 1,000 of these plants home in our area to plant in local gardens. Next slide. You can also consider planting them yourselves. So this is what the inside of that pod looks like. You've got rows of seeds that are on their little puff of fur, hair, fiber, and once those seeds mature, it begins to open, you can harvest these seeds and put them in the ground to grow them. There are all kinds of articles on the internet about how to grow these seeds. They're as simple. The simplest one I have read is you get a hole, put a hole in the ground, you drop 3 or 4 seeds in it, you cover them up and you water it and then let it go. But there are also a lot of other elaborate ways to do that. I personally have not grown desert milkweed from seed, so I can't tell you what the best way to do it is, but this might be something, a good research project. And these seed pods are available. Next slide, please.
I think that's all I have for you.
Okay. Thank you. I would also encourage people to look at the Monarch Watch website. They have the Monarch Watch program for creating gardens in your own place, in your own yard is fabulous. I've done that in conjunction with my neighbors, and people love it. And when you plant these plants, the butterflies will come.
Thank you, Christine. That's wonderful. We already have lots of questions filling up for both Micheline and Christine. So we are going to have a very robust discussion here at the end. And I'd like to welcome our next speakers, Todd Holmes and Rachel Wells. I've had the privilege of working with these two on a project that they're going to tell you a little bit about. They both work for David Evans and Associates, and Rachel's a landscape designer, and Todd is a senior landscape architect. And I will let you guys take it away.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to start off first by talking a little bit about some pollinator plants that you can use in your garden. And so this list that I'm sharing screen on was actually prepared for a demonstration garden that is planned at the Palm Springs Airport. So we'll talk a little bit more about that project in a little bit. Todd will go into detail on it a bit more, but this list was based on some stuff that's available from DWA. So on their website, they do have a lush and efficient document, which has a lot of desert friendly plants. So this list kind of started from there. And we worked with the Sustainability Commission as well, which Christine mentioned for City of Palm Springs. So just to give a little bit of background on the plant list. So we have quite a few plants on this list in different categories, including a specific native or pollinator plants. And this list will be available to all the attendees of the webinar. So I'm not going to go through every single plant. It would take quite some time, but I'll highlight a few here just for the sake of conversation. There's quite a few, but we have in the columns different sort of features of each plant. The botanical name, which is going to be the best way to find plants. If you are looking for plants, try to find them by the botanical name, because common names can vary a lot. So I mean, even just milkweed, desert milkweed, someone might call it by one, desert milkweed, but there could be multiple botanical names that some nurseries will sell them as. So try to find plants by a botanical name is just a general recommendation. But this list has the water needs for it, how fast it grows, its mature size, how long the bloom period is, and what the flowers are like. So you could combine colors and try to look for year-round interest and definitely seasonal interest as well. So as I said, I'll highlight a few plants here. So one that I'll talk about specifically, Isomeris arborea, which its common name is bladderpod. That's actually a native plant. So that plant is native to California. And all of these plants on the list do have some sort of wildlife value, be it for pollinators or for birds as well. So the Isomeris arborea is actually, the flowers are very attractive to pollinators, but the seed pods on it are very interesting and create a sort of like a paper lantern when it dries out that are filled with seeds that actually rattle around inside. So it's very interesting in that regard, but those seeds have great wildlife value to birds, for instance. So that's just one I'll talk about here that's quite attractive. Another one that I'll mention quickly, the Brucellia equiformis coral fountain, has really showy red flowers that are tubular in shape, which are really attractive to hummingbirds as well. So just another one I'll mention briefly. We've got on this list also Salvia apiana, white sage, which is also great for pollinators and also has a lot of ethnobotanical uses as well. So those are just a few plants that I wanted to highlight. And like I said, this list will be available to all the attendees. And we do have the desert milkweed on there, the Asclepias subulata, as has been talked about. That's on the list too. A lot of other plants sort of in different categories. So you can scroll through and look through. We've got photos of them and again, characteristics. And if there's any that stand out to you and you try and find them, local nurseries will tend to have a bit more variety than say Lowe's or Home Depot in some regard, but there'll be plants on here that will be available at a Lowe's or Home Depot as well, some of them. So yeah, this list is available to you guys. And like I said, this was prepared for the Palm Springs demonstration garden that's in the works, which Todd will speak a little bit more about.
Hello, yes, I'm Todd Holmes. So all the plants that Rachel just showed you, or you're going to be able to see them in person in the next year or so at the airport in our demonstration garden. So just to give you guys a quick overview of the project, this is the Palm Springs Airport. As you can see, the terminal building there in the upper picture. Yep, thank Rachel. So the demonstration garden is going to convert, excuse me, 2 areas of turf and annual flowers to the demonstration garden plants that we just showed you guys. And ultimately the goal is going to be to do a turf conversion project, as you can see in the pink areas, to kind of go around the airport and do some conversions of the turf to more drought tolerant plants. And the hope would be to kind of continue to use the pollinator plants and things and create a really nice display of an alternative to turf centric landscaping. So next slide, Rachel.
Yeah.
So this is our first concept for the demonstration garden. This again is the area in front of the terminal, 2 areas that we'll be converting the turf to planting. The idea was to have a variety of different plant types, pollinators, wildflowers, spreading plants, and then have pathways that would allow access and signage that would describe the plants. Down the middle, you can see it. At one point, we thought we might do some turf alternative. We kind of stepped away from that a little bit. On the next slide, I think we can show you. This is the ultimate design. I won't try to get into the fine print, but just to give you a sense of the center went from turf to now it's a spreading plant material that will kind of be a fill-in solid. The other areas, the plants will be kind of scattered around with some crushed rock around them. So we're really looking forward to this project in terms of really displaying a wide variety of different plant types and hopefully helping people to recognize some alternatives for their landscaping. And as was mentioned too, this was a great collaborative project with the airport committee and the sustainability committee and DWA. And so we really feel great that the project went to city council, was well received. And so we're really looking forward to getting this in the ground, hopefully starting construction in the late summer through the fall and have it be complete, sometime in the next winter. So, and then at the end, if anyone has any questions, yeah, we'd definitely be happy to answer those. And thank you guys for the opportunity to share our project with you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Todd and Rachel. And so everyone knows we put the link to dwa.org/pollinator in the chat. You can also just go ahead and type it in. And on the site, we have the list that they've shared. We also have some of the resources from Christine and Micheline. So that is wonderful. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Desert Water Agency's Pollinator Garden. This is a project very near and dear to my heart. How it came to be, well, I told you that it was kind of inspired, if you will, by Christine's question about, how can we get the word out to people and promote pollinator habitat? And I thought the best way to do that is sometimes you got to walk the walk if you're going to talk the talk. So I said, well, why don't we develop our own pollinator garden on our campus? So at our office, this is a garden we built about 4 years ago, right outside of our office. And I figured, how are we going to make sure people know it's a pollinator garden? So we actually partnered with Palm Springs High School in a couple of different ways. We partnered with the art department to come up with a mural concept for the wall, and you'll see some about 10-foot butterflies on either side of a beautiful open portal out to the desert with wildflowers painted all around. And that was actually 2 students. We combined their designs together to make this beautiful mural. And the students helped us paint that mural. So, and then we also partnered with the Palm Springs High School Sustainable Garden Club. And we were very fortunate that a local landscape company, TKD, provided us with a design for this pollinator garden. So they gave us a number of different plants to work with. We can show you some of those plants on the next slide here. And some of these plants have done really, really well, and others have been a bit of a challenge. If you do go to our website, you'll see that the list Christine provided for milkweed for monarchs shows some of these plants that are a little bit more resistant to bunnies. Bunnies have been the biggest issue at our pollinator garden. That, and then we're a very, very full sun garden, which can be a little bit of a challenge. But the penstemon is a plant that you're supposed to be able to plant once and it will come back every year. Now we're not really seeing that. We're planting it and getting about a season out of it. And from what we've heard from others, that seems to be about right. The butterfly bush, that one, and the lantana have been doing fabulous. Our milkweed is doing just fabulous. And I have a picture of our milkweed for you here too. And please come by in person. Even during COVID, this garden is entirely open to the public. You can come by, take a look. Right now, we do have our seed pods kind of open, and I did spot a caterpillar the other day, and I counted the antlers, and it does appear to be a monarch caterpillar. So hopefully I'm going to go check on it and see if we've got a chrysalis yet, because this is just a few days ago. So very exciting. It was getting in its little J shape there. And we are a designated Monarch Waystation, which is something that not just big entities can do. You don't have to have a large garden. Very small yards can still be Monarch Waystations. So monarchwatch.org, we'll go ahead and put that in the chat. And if you're interested in becoming a Monarch Waystation at your home or your HOA, or even if you've got an office building, perhaps you can talk with them about that. So I'm going to pop that in the chat right now. And then if we can go to our next slide here, I wanted to share with you guys, we just opened a little library during COVID. So folks can come and pick up a book. We also put out seed packets for desert marigold and desert mallow, both of which are great nectar plants that support pollinator habitat. I know today we were very heavy talking about butterflies, but bees, hummingbirds, we see all sorts of pollinators in our garden. And then we've also got copies of Lush and Efficient, which makes an excellent coffee table book and is very informative. There's also an online version available at our website at dwa.org/pollinator. So you're welcome to come down and pick one up. Our office is located on Gene Autry, just south of Dinah Shore in Palm Springs. And with that, I think we're going to invite our panelists back up on camera here, and we're going to start answering some of your questions that I've seen in the chat here. So we have a question, and I think this is probably a good one for Christine, and it may also be on the plant guide that Rachel and Todd provided, but tips to where in your yard to plant milkweed: full sun, shade, and about how much water to use.
Okay, so this is Christine. I find that there are so many things that you want to consider for that. Do you have trees? How tall is your hedge? What's the pattern of the sun seasonally in your yard? I have planted milkweed in every part of my yard. It's not totally covered with milkweed, but front, back, sides, and it gets both sun and shade. And they all tend to do very well, just given the variations from the season. But what the instructions say is plant it in full sun and it will do really well. And I do have them in full sun. They do very well. They get very little water. I have put them on an irrigation system, or most of them are on an irrigation system. Some of them are not. And they all seem to do pretty well.
Thank you, Christine. That kind of leads into our next question here. Is it something that has to be tended, or could you just, you know, if there's some vacant land nearby, could perhaps you plant milkweed there and, you know, maybe it's not irrigated? Would it survive?
Can I say that
yeah,
some of our monarch monitors do that, go rogue and kind of just spread
Yep.
seed. They have popped up all over Sunnylands now from the original seeds just rolling and planting themselves. They're very durable. We do recommend full sun at Sunnylands. What we find is the ones, if they have too much shade, they will struggle a little bit.
Yeah.
But the full sun ones, they love it.
Yeah, they tend to lean toward the sun.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yes, I would encourage rogue seed throwers.
Native seeds, native.
Oh,
Yes.
totally.
Enchilada.
Desert milkweed, totally. Not the other seeds. No. But
Yes.
yes.
And I will say the one that you're going to want to look out for is, they call it tropical milkweed. So
Yes.
if you see something advertised as tropical milkweed, or if it looks darker green with more leaf-like
leaves.
structures, you're going to want to avoid that and stick with the more stick-like desert milkweed that you've seen pictures of today. And we'll post pictures of that on our page as well. We have some questions here about, is any of this planted in Oswett Canyon or at the Tockwitz Golf Course? So Christine, do you happen to know if there's any in either of those areas?
I do not. No.
Okay. I do know that there is some planted, the city of Palm Springs has some out and about at a variety of places. The Wellness Park, they have some in the median along Tockwitz. And I did get a question in the Q&A here about, you know, is it a bad idea to plant milkweed too close to roads because butterflies can then get hit by cars? Mickalene, can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, this is always a concern that comes up. And it kind of goes to the same process of us being very worried that what we're doing is going to cause more harm than good. It's impossible to not be near a roadside. And so what they're promoting on the highways across the country with the highway plan, I don't know if that's a response to the highway plan or to the airport project, that they're concerned about the cars and travel. But except when we have like the big swarms, like the painted ladies we had last year that come through in these huge swarms. And yes, there's a lot of fatalities in that. You don't have to worry that much about the butterflies. They're doing a 6,000-mile migration across large parcels of territory, and they do just fine. What it would be worse to do is to have those areas stay bare and deplete the habitat that could be available to give them nourishment that they need to go. They do fine.
Wonderful, thank you. And then
If I could
Sure.
just quickly add too, that initially, before all of this area was built up, these plants were growing in ditches alongside the road. So it's going back to the way it was, essentially planting these plants along roads.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we did get a question about why a garden at the airport. So Todd, I'm going to need your help on this one. Desert Water Agency actually partnered with the city of Palm Springs starting a couple years back, and we've worked really hard and earned some grant funding. You know, the location there was selected because it gets an incredible amount of traffic. You know, there are 1 million people plus that pass through that airport every year. And, you know, when they get there, the first thing they would see when they'd come out of the terminal was, you know, lush green grass and annual flowers. And we really wanted to change that perception. You know, it's also very close to City Hall, and we thought that might be a good option to, you know, allow locals to park at City Hall, come across, take a look at that garden. And the hope ultimately, as Todd described, is making it a bit of a walk where you can see various different plants and perhaps even incorporating some public art. So Todd, could you speak a little bit to that, and then also to an HOA that may be interested in creating a plan for a monarch garden? What are some steps you could do short of perhaps hiring a professional that would be helpful?
Okay. Yeah, I think as you mentioned, Ashley, I think the airport, we got involved in the project after it was set up as a project with the site, but I think as we worked on the project, yeah, it's clear that the location, the visibility is really high. And I think as we expand the turf conversions along the frontage of the airport, if we can continue to introduce different types of plants, I think we can create a really interesting plant collection that would be at a scale that would be worthy of someone making it a destination. Even at the inception of the project, I think it'll be at that level to be able to come and see, 40 different plants. And, I think that's going to be worthwhile. And so I think that's kind of the basis of the selection of the project location. I think it makes a lot of sense. So, and then as far as if an HOA or someone wanted to work on a project without having to, hire a professional designer, I think it's very feasible. I think, there's a lot of, one of the things that I would say is that the internet with YouTube has become an amazing resource for people. And I'm sure everybody's already aware of that, but there's so many things in terms of, one of the things that we do in these conversion projects is we do what's called point source irrigation, where instead of water being sprayed all over the place, the water is a point source right at the plant. And so those systems can be done fairly, it's nothing in the construction of those is technically complex. It's just something you have to learn a little bit about. And I think that's one of the key things in terms of creating a project that would be really drought tolerant and sustainable, because the irrigation system is critical for establishment. A lot of these plants can be ultimately minimal water, but establishment is usually that's the key. And it can be done with hand watering, but the automatic irrigation system is a better way to go in terms of water management, and also having a better chance of ultimately being successful. Plant selection is critical. I think, as we mentioned, Lush and Efficient is a great resource. Our plant list, and making sure that the plants are, compatible with the environment. That's something that is important. I think if there's more questions about that, my contact information, I'm not sure, Ashley, if it's out and about, but I'd be happy, my email and phone number, anybody ever wanted to call and have a chat, I'd be more than happy to spend time, helping anybody to get a game plan together or discuss what the options might be. So I'm happy to help with that.
That's exceedingly generous. Why don't we put your email in the chat there? And Rachel, I wanted to ask you, we got a request for a pick for a plant for a very small space that is maybe lower profile, so not something too tall, that would help support monarch, so have some nectar and other species as well. Do you have a favorite that was on the list that you shared with us?
I don't have a particular favorite. There are quite a few that are smaller like that, and I definitely for my own home look for a little bit smaller, just because in a residential landscape, if you don't have tons of space to dedicate, some of them can be quite large. But when you get the list, definitely look, there's a spreading ground cover section, and one of the species that's in there is a teucrium species. So there's two different ones. There's two different teucriums. They're called germander is the common name. Definitely look at those two. They stay very low, and they're great for bees in particular. The flowers are really attractive to bees. But there's quite a few others that stay quite small. There's some in that spreading ground cover category, but there's also some at the end under the wildflowers and perennials. There's some good ones in there, including some penstemon, which Ashley had on one of her slides. She had shown a sort of a more detailed magenta flowered picture, and that was one of them. So there's good options that stay a bit smaller. Just thankfully we have those heights and stuff indicated on that matrix on the table. So just look through there. But those are just off the top. Those would be ones that I would just generally recommend to stay nice and small.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys so much. We're going to go ahead and wrap up here. We do have a wrap up poll, and we're going to throw some information up on the screen. We really appreciate all of our panelists today. It was so great to have an opportunity to see you guys and interact a bit, and know that there are folks out there asking really great questions and engaged on this topic. So let's go ahead and put the poll question up. And as that's popping up, if you want to keep getting social with us, Desert Water Agency has lots of different social media channels. You're welcome to connect with us that way, or on our website or via phone or email. We wanted to ask you in the poll, did you learn something new today? You have a couple options there. You learned a lot, yeah, maybe one or two things, or no, you were a pro. And then after today's webinar, do you think you will create a pollinator garden of your own? And the options there are, hey, you've already got one, you'd love to have one, maybe you'll do one eventually, or nah, it doesn't sound like something that I'm gonna go for. And then lastly, we just want to know how you heard about this webinar so that we can better promote future webinars. And please feel free to share our webinar information with friends. We love to get people engaged, even if they don't happen to live in Palm Springs. Sometimes we get folks attending from, they're either their second homes or just, people that live somewhere else but are interested in water in the desert. So we're going to give you about 1 more minute to answer those questions, and then we'll share those responses with everybody here. All right, let's see our poll results. Let's show them on the screen. Oh my goodness. Okay, success. Nobody said that they walked away without some new information. So that's wonderful. The majority of people said they learned a lot, and then several people said that they learned a couple things, which is great. I would put myself in the a lot category. As much as I've loved being a part of our pollinator garden at Desert Water Agency, there's so much to know and learn, especially about the species and migration. I found that all very fascinating. After today's webinar, would you create one? So this is really encouraging. We actually, about half of residents or attendees polled said that they already have a pollinator garden. So that's just fabulous. Hopefully you've already got that desert milkweed in there. And if you don't, Christine may be able to help you at an upcoming farmer's market or with a one-on-one transaction. She's got an incredible dedication to getting these plants out there. And then we also said, basically no one said that they don't want a pollinator garden. So that's very encouraging. Do be careful if you plant milkweed. Unfortunately, I tried to establish a little pollinator garden at my mom's house, and the landscapers came about 2 weeks later and thought the milkweed was weeds, and they just pulled it right out. So there are some things to keep an eye on when you're getting started. And most of our friends here heard about this webinar via email. So all good information. Thanks again to everyone who attended. We really appreciate it. Our next webinar will be held on Earth Day in conjunction with the City of Palm Springs. We're going to be talking about the Mayor's Water Conservation Challenge and DWA incentives. So gear up, carve some time out on Earth Day to learn about how to be a little bit more eco-friendly with your water footprint. All righty. Thank you very much. We appreciate your attendance. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.